Hello and welcome to Books for Beneficiaries. My name is Pete Williams, the host of the program on which we talk about the needs of beneficiaries, those who are about to inherit from an estate. Try to answer questions you might have and give you some factoids that might be helpful in your journey to inheriting from an estate. Today, I'm going to start a little mini series on investing beneficiary funds. It's important to know that what I'm talking about here is not investing once the beneficiary has their funds. We're talking about what's going on with the assets pending distribution. The scenario is this. Somebody dies and you're named as beneficiary in their will or trust. And there is somebody that has custody of those assets and you want to know what's going on. How are they invested? What are they doing with the money? That's what we're talking about. So usually it's a trustee, administrator, or executor that has the authority to manage those assets. However, sometimes the will or trust designates an investment advisor to handle the investment side of business. That's very rare, often in bigger estates where they want some continuity with the investments of the assets prior to death. It's more often that somebody is appointed upon death of the estate holder, and they name somebody as successor trustee or executor. And this person or entity must follow what's generally called the prudent man rule. That's just simply being prudent with the funds prior to their distribution to you as a beneficiary. And their job is to get those assets to you as unscathed as possible, considering the risk involved and the possible rewards. And when I say unscathed, we're going to talk about that in this three-part series. Unscathed doesn't mean that these assets may not take losses. They may very well take losses if a person dies during, say, for instance, the beginning of a bear market in housing, bear market in stocks. So there could be some losses, but prudent man rule says that the person that has custody of your assets will do what is done by somebody in a similar situation in a prudent manner. Now, I'm going to boil this down to three different circumstances. The three that I found in my practice to be most common are there's an immediate payout after some sort of administration. So somebody drafts a will or a trust and they say, hey, when I die, pay my bills and then divide my assets equally among my three children. There are delayed or staged payouts, and that can come in many different flavors. We could have somebody who writes a trust and says, my son's doing well. He really doesn't need this money. Give it to him when he turns 65. Money. And then at age 65, here you go, son, it's yours. Probably more common than that is a staged payout in some form. In a staged payout, we give out little chunks of money over time. So settlor or the owner of the estate says, don't give all of the assets immediately. Give 25% of the balance of the estate. And then in 5 years, give out another 33.33%. And then in another 5 years, give out 1/2 of the remaining balance. And then in another 5 years, give the remaining balance. And that can come in all forms. And it can also be at ages. So somebody dies, they have a will or trust that says, if my child is under the age of 35, wait till they're 35, give them half of the inheritance, wait 10 years, and then give them the other half at age 45. So it's up to the imagination of the settlor and the circumstances of the beneficiary. And then finally, I'm going to talk about split interests. This usually happens in second marriages where there are children of the first marriage. So the decedent says, I love my children. I want them to have my estate, but I don't want to put my second spouse out in the cold, out on the street. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to allow the second spouse, to live in the house for as long as she's alive, and pay her out the income of the trust until she dies. And then everything goes over to the children in equal share. So that's what I'm going to call a split interest. What I'm going to talk about first is this idea of an immediate payout after an administration. So very common. Hey, when I die, clean up the estate, pay the taxes, pay the bills, and then distribute assets to my children in equal share. So who has custody of those assets in that interim period before they're distributed to you as beneficiary? Well, in a trust administration, it's a trustee. And in a probate administration, it's an executor named in a will, or it's an administrator if there is no will, or if something goes wrong with the person named in the will, and then somebody else has to come forward. So they call that person an administrator, not an executor. Now, let me make another fine distinction here, is that there are assets where there is no administration. And these assets are things like joint tenancy, pay on death, transfer on death, IRA beneficiary, retirement plan beneficiary. So these are assets that are not held by some fiduciary. These are assets that are your responsibility as beneficiary to go to an institution typically and say, hey, I am the named beneficiary. Here's my identification. Here's proof that it's mine. Give me the money. I have other episodes where I talk about these no administration assets. So you might want to check for those. So when settling an estate even on an immediate payout, the one thing I want beneficiaries to know is there are some things that have to be done, and they have to be done correctly. And that means it takes some time. Assets are gathered up. Liquid assets are usually placed in either a single bank account or a brokerage money market account. So as the trustee or administrator goes around, they consolidate bank accounts, they consolidate brokerage accounts, and they get it into one pool of funds typically. Also, the fiduciary needs to retitle assets. They need to go into a brokerage firm and say, hey, this was in John Jones as trustee of the John Jones Trust. John Jones died, and so they retitle it to Sam Jones as trustee of the John Jones Trust. The fiduciary also has to collect receivables if there's any money owed to the estate, and they have to protect valuables, jewelry, paintings, all kinds of things that they need to protect, and they have to put that in safekeeping. So it's a big job to do that. And then unless the will or trust specifies that assets are to be distributed in kind, the assets are sold. So if the estate owns real estate and there's no instructions otherwise, the real estate is sold and put into that single bank account or money market fund until they get all the assets sold. And out of that, they pay bills and they pay taxes and they settle the estate. So it's a big job. I would encourage beneficiaries to be a little patient. However, at the same time, not too patient that you let things go. So you as beneficiary need to be on top of this. You need to demand information from the fiduciary who's handling the estates. And then the fiduciary needs to calculate the division of the estate. It's always nice when the estate is divided equally, say among children. Decedent had 3 children. When I die, just a third, a third, a third. However, there are times when there's unequal division of estates, and you as beneficiary probably should understand that and inquire as to why it's unequal and be satisfied that it's unequal. We talked on other episodes about undue influence. When somebody has signed, when in fact they did not know what they were signing, they were not in the correct mental capacity to sign. So you must inquire about that. Also, what is somewhat of a complication is in-kind distributions. So that's a case where I draft a trust or a will and I say, when I die, leave my house to my son, and then leave my daughter an equal amount in cash. So that takes a little bit of time. The fiduciary has to get an appraisal of the property and then allocate the equivalent value of liquid assets, cash, to the other beneficiary. And there are sometimes complications where there's not enough cash to satisfy what the value of the houses were. And then there has to be some true ups where you say, okay, Johnny gets the house worth 500,000 and there's only 400,000 in cash. The fiduciary has to either put a lien on the house or the beneficiary has to get a loan and pay off the other beneficiary the extra. So let's just say that the administration is going along fine, but there's a question of maybe $1,000 or $2,000 of taxes that might be owed. And we have to go to the accountant or wait a year to find out if taxes are owed. Well, the fiduciary often does a holdback. And they say, okay, well, we're going to keep $5,000 in the account just in case there's something in the next year or two. And they will make partial payments. They will pay out the bulk of the estate and hold back amounts that might be due and payable. Don't be surprised if that happens. So going back to today's subject is we're talking about the immediate payout. And so all of these things I've talked about probably are doable in a span, certainly of 2 years, if it's a straightforward case, and often within 1 year. Now, if it's a probate case, you have to rely on judges and courts and hearing dates and that sort of thing. So it can bleed into the second year. But often in a trust case, for instance, all of this can be done within a year. Now, sometimes there are investment instructions under the terms of the will or trust. There's a notorious case out there that we studied in law school where this man worked for Eastman Kodak all his life. He got Eastman Kodak stock. It paid a great dividend, and he was invested very heavily in Eastman Kodak. And in his will, he said, do not sell this Eastman Kodak stock. It's been very good to me. It's got a great dividend. Why would you ever sell this? For those of you who do not know, Eastman Kodak went bankrupt. So that's what we called an undiversified portfolio. That's a portfolio with a large amount of one stock, and all kinds of things can happen. And it was a great company at the time when cameras had film and you ran down to the local CVS to get it developed. But those days are gone, and any company, Pan Am, Eastman Kodak, a lot of companies, US Steel, they can go broke. So I shudder sometimes when I see some of the investment instructions in the will or trust. The fiduciary has one of two choices: either follow the terms of the decedent. More likely, in a case like that, you go to the court and say, "Hey, Your Honor, this trust says I'm supposed to hang on to this Eastman Kodak stock. I don't feel comfortable doing that." There's a hearing date, and beneficiaries can make their desires known. But the more likely, the judge will order that the stock be sold and assets and an immediate payout be held in cash until payout. Another difficulty or challenge is that the fiduciary is going to inherit a portfolio that was developed by the decedent for the decedent. It is often considered prudent to sell the portfolio for two reasons. One is we don't know. We don't know if this portfolio is going to collapse under circumstances in the next 2 years. So maybe the prudent thing to do is to sell these assets. And number two, the portfolio that was constructed was for the decedent and not for the beneficiaries. Often, the beneficiaries have different goals and objectives with their investments. They have different circumstances. So don't be surprised if during this custody period, the fiduciary sells assets, liquidates them, and then at the end of that administration, gives you the cash, and then you can go off and do whatever you want. If you want to replicate decedent's portfolio, you can do that. Once again, if it's an immediate payout, we're talking about cash equivalents, bank CDs, money market funds, T-bills, things with minimal risk through this 1 to 2 year period. And just in closing here, I want to sum up, assert your rights in an accounting. Different states and counties have different rules. I will say generally there's an accounting once a year, how much assets are in there, how much they're worth, the expenses, the income. And if you have any questions, ask. In fact, if you're a beneficiary, you may even ask for quarterly or even monthly statements. Accept conservative investments during the period of administration. We need to keep assets liquid, pay expenses, obviously, to cut checks to utilities and credit card debt and pay off loans. And then we need to stay liquid to make the final payments. And then finally, be prepared with your own ideas on what you want to do with your assets. And I would encourage you to read the literature on this, because it's very sad to see, and I've seen it in my own practice, where unearned money sometimes goes through the fingers very quickly. Look at the statistics on lottery winners. Many of them are broke in a few years. So if you're expecting an inheritance, if you're a beneficiary of an estate, it's a great time to start thinking about what you're going to do with those assets once they're paid out to you. All right. Well, that's it. Thank you very much. As I mentioned in all my programs, this is not to be considered legal, tax, or investment advice. It is solely for educational purposes and to give you some ideas to go and seek out your own legal, tax, and investment advice. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time, where we talk about some of the other payout structures in estate administration. Thank you.